Their research shows that children as young as 3 already start forming gendered ideas. You would be surprised to hear when asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Boys overwhelmingly pick pilots or doctors, while girls choose teachers or caregivers. Rocket Learning is tackling this by creating early learning content that challenges gender stereotypes. Their stories and lessons show boys and girls in equal roles. They use gender-neutral language and they encourage teachers to promote equal participation. What's even better is that they're moving towards making these tools available for other organizations to use so that the entire early learning sector moves towards more gender-equal messaging.
Hello and a warm welcome to a very special podcast, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors, and businesses, professionals, and of course, philanthropists who are disruptors yet not in your face. The disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they've embarked on. The values are as strong as the mission. Unusual Suspects streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, moneycontrol.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms and directories. Welcome to the third season of Catalyzing Change, the Power of Philanthropy, the podcast series by Unusual Suspects, a money control podcast in collaboration with Giving Pie, India's first family-focused philanthropy network. As philanthropy in India evolves, a new wave of giving is emerging, one that prioritizes collaboration, trust-based models, and long-term systemic change. This season, we turn our focus to gender in philanthropy, exploring how strategic giving can advance equity and empowerment for all genders. Through conversations with leading philanthropists, change makers, and sector experts, we uncover what it takes to drive meaningful impact, where philanthropy can step in to bridge critical gaps, and how collaboration can accelerate progress. Each episode will spotlight a different facet of gender-focused giving. In this episode, we will explore how philanthropy can drive gender equity by investing in early child development, or ECD, a sector deeply tied to women's unpaid and underpaid labor. We'll also talk about how strengthening childcare, maternal health, and nutrition programs can reduce the burden on frontline workers and caregivers, most of whom are women, and create pathways for empowerment. I am delighted to have Supriya Balakrishnan. Supriya serves as the Investment Director and India Head at LGT Venture Philanthropy, where she leads the organization's investment strategy in India, focusing on sectors such as education, healthcare, and environment. With over a decade of experience spanning investment banking, social sector consulting, impact investing, and venture philanthropy, Supriya brings a wealth of knowledge to her role. Prior to joining LGT VP, she worked with the United Nations Development Program and Tata Trusts. Welcome to Unusual Suspects, Supriya. Delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you, Gaurav. Very excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Supriya, let's go back a bit, and it's about your journey too, from investment banking, a career in finance, and pivoting, if I may say so, or transitioning into social impact sector. Today, as you are also the head of India head of LGT Venture Philanthropy, and you have a very you sit at a very vantage position. You have a ringside view, and also take critical decisions on investment, which are essentially extremely important to enable large-scale change. What was behind this shift? What made you make this shift? And how has your approach to funding evolved over the years, Supriya?
I get asked this a lot. Why leave finance for philanthropy? And honestly, it was never about leaving finance. It was just about figuring out how capital could be used better. I grew up in a household where social justice wasn't just a topic, it was lived. My mother was a teacher, and I saw her use that role to do much more than just teach. She worked at an orphanage, making sure girls got access to education. My father, in his own way, always made me aware of my privileges, but more importantly, he made me question what I was doing with them. And so when I got into investment banking, And I loved the rigor of it, the problem solving, the way capital moved. But at some point, I started asking myself who actually benefits from all this capital movement. We were analyzing risk, but only from an institutional perspective. What about the risks faced by people who don't even have a financial safety net? I tried to stay engaged at my bank through CSR, thinking maybe I could drive impact from within, but it was still very distant. I wanted to understand not just where capital was going, but also how it could be used more intentionally. And that led me to Dasra. And let me tell you, that was a game changer. Suddenly, I wasn't looking at funding from a financial modeling perspective. I was out in remote villages in areas like Gadchiroli in Jharkhand, working on issues like tribal health and employability and really last mile service delivery. And I remember visiting a village where getting healthcare meant walking for several hours. In finance, I'd just been optimizing numbers, but here the conversations were about basic survival, a child getting vaccinated in time, a mother receiving maternal care, and it just hit very differently. At the same time, Dasra also gave me a bird's eye view of the philanthropic ecosystem. So, who funds what, why they fund it, where the gaps are. And I saw firsthand how nonprofits were constantly struggling to cover core costs, to invest in leadership, and to build long term sustainability because most funding was just project based and not organization based. It was clear to me that capital needed to be more patient and more flexible. And that realization really pushed me towards what we call now innovative finance. At Tata Trust, I worked on structuring funding mechanisms that could align capital with long term impact. One of the biggest projects I worked on was an education development impact bond, where funding was directly tied to learning outcomes for children. And seeing finance linking directly to measurement impact reinforced my belief that philanthropy could be more than just grant making, it could actually be catalytic. I took that up at UNDP, like you mentioned, where I focused on expanding the role of private capital in development financing. I worked on instruments again like impact bonds, social success notes, and saw how these innovative models could bring in more funding into sectors that needed it the most. I saw the potential for mobilizing large pools of capital, ensuring funding was just not about one time interventions, but about creating more sustained impact and the sustained impact at scale. And that's what really led me to LGT Venture Philanthropy. At LGT VP, we don't just fund programs, we fund organizations, leaders, and ecosystems. We really provide multi-year flexible capital so organizations can think beyond the next grant cycle and actually focus on deep and systemic change. What really resonated with me is the trust that we place in local leadership. Too often, as you may know, philanthropy operates with a top-down approach, with external funders deciding what's best. But here we back organizations that are deeply embedded in their communities because they know what's needed far better than we ever could. We also don't just write checks and walk away. We're very hands-on partners. So whether it's helping an organization strengthen its strategy, grow its leadership, or connect with the right ecosystem players, we're very deeply involved in their journey. And at LGTVP, we approach critical issues like early childhood development from a systems lens, recognizing that sustainable impact requires working across several levers, from strengthening community-based work to influencing policy and to unlocking new funding mechanisms. Over time, my perspective on funding has evolved. Earlier, I thought the challenge was scaling great solutions. Now I realize the real challenge is fixing the system that determines which solutions get funded in the first place. So finance taught me how capital moves, but impact showed me how it can be redirected to actually change lives. And that is why I do this work with the hope to shift power, to build resilience, and to create lasting change.
Absolutely, Supriya. Let's change tack a bit and maybe narrow focus this discussion on early child development, which is a core area of your line of work. ECD's key focus for LGTVP. And while this is often seen as a child-centric intervention, actually its success relies primarily and very, very heavily on women because they're both caregivers at home, and also they perform the role of very critical frontline workers. How does LGTVP consider these dynamics in the approach to ECD, Supriya?
That is such an important question, Gaurav, because when we talk about early childhood development or ECD, most people think of just the child. But the reality is that ECD is a gendered issue. At home, women carry most of the responsibility for childcare. In India, over 90% of family caregivers are women, and they also handle cooking, cleaning, and other household duties, while less than 10% of Indian men participate in domestic work. This means that a child's early development isn't just about access to food, healthcare, or early learning. It also depends on whether their caregiver has the time, support, and knowledge to provide that care. Then there's the workforce side. So India's early childhood system is almost entirely run by women. One of the most important government programs supporting young children is the Anganwadi system, which is a network of childcare centers that provide early learning, nutrition, and health services for children under 6. When a mother takes her child into an Anganwadi, she is interacting with a female Anganwadi worker. If she needs health support, she turns to a female ASHA worker or community health worker. These women keep the system running, yet they're overworked, underpaid, and often lack training or support that they need to do their jobs well. And so at LGT Venture Philanthropy, we don't just invest in children, we invest in families, frontline workers, and the government systems that support them. While we were landscaping the sector, we found that many ECD programs recognize that women play a huge role, but very few actively challenge the gender norms that place the entire burden of childcare on them. Some of our grantees are working to change that. Take Arman, for example. They use mobile technology to improve healthcare for mothers and children. Initially, they worked around gender norms. For example, they let a woman choose a time slot to receive health calls when they were free. This was gender accommodative and gender sensitive, but it did not change the fact that health decisions were still seen as a woman's responsibility. Now they're actively involving fathers, families, and others in health decisions. Their new content encourages shared decision making so that childcare and health aren't just seen as the mother's job. They also focus on empowering community health workers, not just tracking how many calls they make, but also measuring their confidence, their leadership, and their ability to influence families. Then there's an organization called Rocket Learning, which is challenging gender biases in early learning. Their research shows that children as young as 3 already start forming gendered ideas. You would be surprised to hear when asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Boys overwhelmingly pick pilots or doctors, while girls choose teachers or caregivers. Rocket Learning is tackling this by creating early learning content that challenges gender stereotypes. Their stories and lessons show boys and girls in equal roles. They use gender-neutral language, and they encourage teachers to promote equal participation. What's even better is that they're moving towards making these tools available for other organizations to use so that the entire early learning sector moves towards more gender equal messaging.
Supriya, my next question is about caregivers, whether they're within households or as frontline workers. They play a very, very essential and a critical role in ECD outcomes, don't they? What are some of the biggest barriers that you can point out that they face, and where do you see there are some opportunities for change that can be brought about, Supriya?
That's a great follow-up, Gaurav, because caregivers are at the center of early childhood development, yet they operate in a system that doesn't support them enough. Whether it's a mother at home or an Anganwadi worker in the community, they are expected to do everything, often without proper recognition, compensation, or help. So there is a large unseen cost of care. Let's start with the parents, particularly mothers. Caregiving in India is overwhelmingly a woman's responsibility. Women spend 5 times more time than men on unpaid care work, balancing childcare, cooking, cleaning, and household responsibilities. And that burden has direct consequences. Nearly half of women that are not in the workforce say it's because of caregiving responsibilities. Even as the women's workforce participation has risen to 42%, a large portion of this is rural women engaged in unpaid and informal work, not stable formal jobs. This isn't just about women dropping out of the workforce, it's also about financial independence and agency. When women are forced to stay at home because they have no childcare options, they lose income, they lose their savings and decision-making power within their families. Now you'd think the solution would be simple, build more childcare facilities. And there is a government initiative trying to do that. It's called the Palna Scheme. The Palna Scheme was designed to provide daycare centers for children up to 6 years old, giving mothers a safe place to leave their kids. But here's the issue, Palna has only reached about 17,000 creches. While that sounds like a big number, India has about 1.5 million Anganwadis. And so the gap is massive. The result of this is that millions of women have no reliable, affordable childcare options. Some states like Karnataka and Kerala have made progress in implementing Palna, but in many others, these facilities either don't exist or are completely underfunded. So one of the biggest opportunities is to expand access to childcare beyond Palna through better government programs, employer-supported childcare, or even community-based centers. Now let's talk about frontline workers briefly. The Anganwadi workers, the Ashas, and community health workers who hold up India's entire early childhood system. They're responsible for nutrition tracking, immunization, preschool education, maternal health, and are buried under a mountain of paperwork. But despite their critical role, most of them earn less than a minimum wage, receiving very limited training, and have no real career growth. One of their biggest challenges is time, and instead of spending their day engaging with children and families, they spend hours doing manual paperwork and data entry. That's where technology and process improvements can create a massive change. So where do we really see the opportunities for change? One is to reduce the burden on frontline workers. We have organizations in our portfolio like Khushi Baby that are leading the way here. They've developed digital tools that actually cut down the administrative work, freeing up Anganwadi workers to spend more time actually engaging with children and families. Secondly, we want to empower caregivers with knowledge. Another great example is Noora Health, which trains mothers and families on responsive caregiving, nutrition, and early childhood health. By giving caregivers the right knowledge, they turn homes into better learning and development environments for children. And finally, we want to recognize and invest in care work. Whether at home or in the field, caregiving is real work. It needs to be formally recognized and supported through fair wages, professional development, and proper resources.
Supriya, my final question is about India, a milestone that we are rapidly marching towards. It's the 100th year of Indian independence in 2047, and many things will change by then. Lots of economic markers will get better, will progress and develop significantly. And in all of this, philanthropy has a key role to play, particularly in advancing gender equity. My question to you is that given LGT VP's focus on early child development, how can investing in this area create pathways for broader gender equity, which is something that by 2047, by which India is aspires to become a developed country, we of course need to have a more gender equal society. So how do you think your focus on ECD can create these enablers, and also what should funders do differently to maximize this impact? Supriya?
That is such a timely question because as India celebrates 100 years of independence, another major milestone is approaching. So it will be 50 years of the Integrated Child Development Services Scheme, or ICDS. ICDS is one of the world's largest social programs, and for 5 decades, it has played a crucial role in improving child nutrition, maternal health, and early learning. But as we look ahead, the question isn't just about what it has achieved, but also about where it needs to go next. We know that investing in early childhood development isn't just the right thing to do. It's also one of the smartest economic investments that we can make. I quote the study of Nobel laureate James Heckman's research, which shows that high-quality ECD programs deliver some of the highest returns on investment, ranging anywhere from $7 to $12 for every dollar spent. Why is this? Because children who receive strong early learning support go on to perform better in school, they earn higher incomes, and they're also less likely to need social assistance at a later point in life. In other words, investing in ECD doesn't just benefit children, it also strengthens families, it strengthens economies, and also strengthens societies for several generations. One of the biggest opportunities that we see as LGT VP in India today is really transforming Anganwadis. we think that they can be transformed into high-quality early learning centers. India has 1.5 million Anganwadis reaching over 80 million children, but today most of them are seen as nutrition centers rather than spaces for holistic early childhood development. If we want to accelerate progress on both ECD as well as gender equity, we need to invest in Anganwadis, not just as food distribution centers, but as vibrant early learning environments where children get the right start, caregivers receive the right support, and early educators are also recognized as skilled professionals. Encouragingly, we are seeing increasing interest from both global as well as domestic funders in ECD, but there's a funding gap that's holding back large-scale progress. Global funders tend to focus on policy, on advocacy, data, large-scale systems change, and you would see domestic funders often leaning towards programmatic interventions, things like funding preschools, teacher training, or even community-driven models. Both models are very valuable, but what's really missing is catalytic capital, the funding that really helps bridge the gap between early-stage pilots and large-scale adoption. With this missing middle, India's ECD sector will continue to have a pipeline of great ideas, but will never reach scale. At LGT VP, this is exactly where we focus. We invest in organizations that sit at the intersection of innovation and scale, helping bridge the gap between these small pilots and widespread adoption. As ICDS turns 50 and India moves towards 100 years of independence, this is our moment to reimagine early childhood development. Instead of looking at piecemeal or short-term fixes, we need bold and coordinated, but most importantly, gendered efforts to strengthen what already exists.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you for sharing a deep insight and perspective on a range of issues. Thank you for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation with us.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. I really enjoyed the conversation.